Welcome to Building Sustainability Podcast with me, your host, Jeffrey Hart, aka Jeffrey the Natural Builder. Every fortnight, join me as I talk to designers, builders, makers, dreamers and doers, exploring the wide world of sustainability in the built environment by talking to wonderful people who are doing excellent things. Hello and welcome to episode 71. This is another interview with Sigi Koko. This episode does stand alone, but it might make more sense with a little bit of background if you listen to episode 70 first. I promised a little tiny house update. I'll try and keep this pretty brief. Things are starting to move along. I went away to an earth building AGM and just before I left, I pulled up all the floor protection, hoovered everything out, gave the floors a really good sand, and then gave them a coat of oil. And oh my goodness, the ash flooring that I've put in has all of these hidden peachy tones, which are just gorgeous. It's really, really something. I can't really explain how wonderful it is. By taking up the floor protection, it's really turned a corner on the building. It is no longer a building site. It is a home. The first thing I did when I got back was to pop my sofa in here. And so I have a comfy little space to hang out. And then I did all the finishing details to my bookcase / recording studio / desk / booze cabinet. It's a multi-purpose space. It's a plant display unit as well. I have put pictures of that on my social medias, Jeffrey the Natural Builder on Instagram and Facebook. Have a look and let me know what you think. I'm pretty pleased with it. Also, a quick reminder that if you've heard episode 70, you will have heard about the competition that Timber Development UK are running for students and recent graduates. Make sure you check out the links in the show notes for those. This episode actually features a few questions that were submitted by the Building Sustainability patrons. In this episode, we've got a question from Alex and a question from Joanna. In fact, this episode starts off with a question from Alex. So thank you to those for joining in. Being able to submit your own personal questions to the upcoming guests is a lovely privilege for the patrons. So if you want to help support the podcast and get some bonus audio and some other little treats, then do head to patreon.com/building sustainability. Speaking of patrons, we have had a few more this month. We have got Tabitha Binding, Stuart Bridget, Joel Endersby. Thank you so much to those three for supporting the podcast. A special note that Tabitha Binding has gone for the £5 level, meaning I will be carving her a beautiful eating spoon. I don't know if you've ever eaten with a wooden spoon, but genuinely, it will change your life. But I would say that, wouldn't I? So yes, thank you to those three, and thank you to everyone else who supports the podcast. Your little bit of money every month really adds up to me being able to afford to live and dedicate the time that this podcast takes. So thank you. Speaking of spoons, you might have heard on the other episode, I have a spoon carving course coming up on May the 7th. If you are in the Bristol area of the UK, then come on down and learn this wonderful craft. It'll open up a whole world of just very, very beautiful people. There is all the info and a link in the show notes if you want to come along. And the final thing to say is that if you are in London at the beginning of next month, the 1st, 2nd and 3rd of March, then come along to Future Build. I will be down there giving talks on straw insulation and talking about earth floors, as well as trying to snatch some little interviews for the podcast with all of the wealth of knowledge that are there. That is in London XL, 1st to the 3rd of March 2022. Hope to see you there. Okay, that's quite enough from me. Enjoy Sigi Koko. I'll be back at the end. See ya. How are you choosing the products and the materials based on which part of the world you're in?
Well, I mean, I'm always more or less between DC and New York City.
So what's your sort of local palette then?
Our local palette always clay for mass, mostly straw for insulation, and mostly that is straw bale. Because light clay straw is hard to make correctly, and you need much more thickness to get the same R value.
Yeah.
And it's slower. I'm just starting to explore hempcrete as cost effective. Right now, straw is by far the cheapest way to get that R value. Stone is part of the palette. Trees, right? So we live in an area where there are forests. So particularly if almost everywhere that I build, there are mills nearby that will either mill something for you, or they're harvesting from a local forest that they own, and they may not be sustainably certified. But as someone explained to me once, I said, "Oh, is your forest sustainably certified?" And they said, "Honey, we've had our forest for 130 years. If we didn't harvest things sustainably, we wouldn't be in business." I was like, "Oh, okay."
That's a very good point.
Yeah, so wood is definitely part of the palette. I try to avoid steel, partly because of the embodied energy. It's almost always, structural steel is almost always high recycle content, but it's no longer made in the US for the most part, right? So it's, again, that 6,000 miles. And if we can do it with something that's local, I'll make that choice. So I would say, yeah, so straw, clay, stone, wood, that's the primary palette.
Okay. And then do you design for people not sort of in your region? And if so, how do you get to find out what's their local palette?
Not so much. So when people email me often, and I'm in India or I'm in Portugal, and the first thing I email back is say, find somebody that's near you. While I would be honored and it would be absolutely wonderful to go and build something in India, right? That would make me so happy. I don't know you're local. So if you work with someone local, they know what your regulations are. So they won't stumble on something accidentally, which I very well could. They'll know what your local resources are and where to get them, right? So, and it's probably like heresy to say this as a designer, but there's really nothing special about I design a certain way, and so like you're going to get this certain thing. Like anyone can design that way, right? So there are beautiful buildings everywhere in the world, right?
Yeah.
So that's not the magic. The magic is the process of understanding what's near you. So to me, the first question I would ask, if I was, plot me down somewhere and okay, build something, the first question I would ask is, what is my climate? And am I looking for materials that insulate me because the comfort temperature that I want inside is radically different at different times of the year from outside? If the answer to that question is yes, if you have 4 seasons and winter is cold and you will ever heat or cool that space, then insulation is what you want. So then I will go find insulation materials, and those tend to be the ones that are lightweight, because what you're really insulating with is air, right? So little tiny air pockets, right? So pumice is a mineral, but it's insulating, right? So if you live near a lava flow,
that's not a luxury we have.
Right, exactly. It's often some kind of agricultural fiber, right? Because agriculture is ubiquitous around the world. And then, or if you're somewhere where if you are always trying to stay cool, always, right? So you're in the middle of a desert, especially if it's arid. If your goal always is cool me down, cool me down, cool me down, then thick mass and shade it. right? So keep it out of the direct sun and put a living roof on it so your roof is actively cooling itself, and insulate the roof, right? Okay, now I'm looking for mass materials. Those tend to be the heavy ones. So clay, stone, right? Yeah. So to me, I would approach it that way first, and then look for the materials. So then, okay, I need to build a roof over me. That means I need to be able to span from one point to another. Now I need something that is strong enough to go from here to here, right? And you can do that by creating domes if all you have is mass. But if you have trees around you, or bamboo, right, you can span with some other material, right? So that's how I would approach it is, okay, ask the problem first. Okay, now what do I need to solve that problem? And now go hunting. Okay.
Yeah.
Where's the material that solves that problem?
Lovely. I think that's a fantastic answer.
Oh.
There's always, I'm sort of dubious of anyone that says, this is the way you should build a house, and then you sort of plonk it anywhere. I think that's not understanding climate and the differences in needs.
Absolutely, yes, I agree with you. Yeah.
Do you favour building with raw materials or products?
Raw materials.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for one, they're really empowering, right? So, like, just use clay plaster as an example. I never buy clay plaster, ever, never. I know there's beautiful products out there, but to me, if I can teach someone that you can take your soil, or you can go to a pottery supplier and buy this 13-pound bag of, powdered clay, and you can figure out how to make your own plaster. To me, I've just empowered someone.
Yeah.
And they have to understand it in this whole other tactile way, which is always deeper to me. It's a deeper understanding of the material. And so before you ever even put it on, you understand it in a way.
It's not just, I add water to this bag. Yeah. It's sort of the difference between, if you're going to make pancakes and you use a mix and you just add water or whatever, versus, oh, I know there's an egg in there, and I know there's oil in there, and I know there's flour, right? So and if I don't have this, then I can substitute with this, and it's still, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's something I kind of struggle with, because on the one hand, I'm very purist. I want to be like, the most raw materials possible. But then I'm also conscious that if we want natural materials to take over the world, then they need to be in kind of products that every person can sort of slot into place easily.
Yeah. And I think absolutely there is a place for clay plaster products, for, just to cycle back to that example. Absolutely. And like Sukita Ray Krimmel, she has that earth and floor product, right?
Yeah.
It's brilliant, right? But if I know how to do it another way, that's how I'm going to teach my clients. But yes, no, I'm grateful that those products exist. And, like panelized straw bale, oh, please take over the world. Yeah. But if you ask what my preference is, it's always going to be, oh, let's dig a hole.
Sure. I'm right there with you. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So this is sort of cycling back a little bit to the design. How do conventional architects view what you're up to? Do you ever get any sort of feedback on that?
No.
And don't care.
I don't care. If I had cared, I would have edited how I approach school, right? But I think there's more and more architects are embracing, certainly they're embracing green building, right, in air quotes, but I think more and more are embracing natural products, at least to some degree, and natural building to a smaller degree. And where I'm differentiating is, for example, putting clay plaster on a conventional wall versus, the wall is actually different. right? Certainly what I notice the most is the questions people ask. There's more uniform knowledge. When you say a straw bale house, almost everyone knows what you're talking about now.
Sure, yes.
Right. If you, it's not as much with cob. So I usually use the word adobe instead of cob because adobe has a familiarity, at least in the US, right? So even if I'm talking about cob, I call it sculptural adobe if it's someone that I know doesn't know what I'm talking about. So that they know, I mean, a wall made out of clay. Otherwise they think corn cobs.
Oh yeah, that's going to be confusing.
Yeah. So I think that's always the beginning, right? When the knowledge base is more ubiquitous. So that's the first step to adopting something, is to understand it and be at least curious about it. But I wouldn't say there's, a huge slew of architects out there looking to design with straw bales or clay
yet,
walls.
hopefully.
Yeah. But expanding, but slow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a pretty good representation of what's being taught and how it's being taught, kind of.
Quite possibly.
And that hopefully will be changing considerably in the upcoming years.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Here's a good one. This is probably something like who's your favorite child type question, but do you prefer designing or building?
Oh, so yeah. No, definitely it's a who's your favorite child question.
Right.
But so when I left architecture school, I thought, okay, well, now you get a job, because you have to do an internship with architecture. So I thought, okay, well, let me find a job with an architect. And so I found a job. And when I was talking to her, I said, well, what would I do? Like, what would my job be? And she said, well, basically you tell the builder how to do their job. And I was like, I don't know how to do their job. So I declined the offer and I went and did construction, like just on conventional homes, for 2 years. And I wanted to understand what that job is like. And for real, I'm going to answer your question. And what I learned from that is 2 things about building and 1 thing about myself. So I love being hands-on, even when it's something that conventional. But what I learned was there's more than one way to do something. And often there's multiple easy ways to do something and multiple hard ways to do something. And so just that frees you up, that there doesn't have to be an architectural detail. There can be, right? So, and you can have a conversation with a builder about how would you do this, right? And then the second thing it taught me is how to have respectful conversations with builders, right? Which I think is, at least here, that is a big problem. Right? So it is really, really challenging for me to get a new builder that I haven't worked with before to call me the first time.
Right.
Because and by the time I'm comfortable with them, every single one at some point tells me their horror story that they had with an architect being an ass. Can I say ass?
Yeah, of course.
Good, because too late. Right. So that's what I learned about construction that I then take forward. And the thing I learned about myself was I love hands-on, but I missed the creative.
Right.
And when I'm just, when you're designing something, it seems like it's all like tracing paper and colored pens, but this mostly computer time, right? I'm a computer person. That is, the beginning is all paper and trace and happy, right? So sort of the romantic architecture moments. But really what most of it is sitting there moving lines on a computer screen, right?
Yeah.
And when I'm doing that too much, I miss the hands-on. So for me personally, I need a job where I get to do both, and then I fell into loving teaching. So
Yeah.
that's then my third child that I love equally.
I'm very much the same, actually. The teaching really surprised me. I was kind of, pushed forward and did it, and suddenly went, I love this. This is, that satisfaction of certainly teaching physical skills. When someone, plastering, they pick up a trowel and they push the mud on the floor first time, and and then you come back a little while later and they're smoothing, and it's that big grin on their face is quite addictive.
Yes. And my favorite moments are when you hear one student explaining something to another student. So I'm like, my work is done here.
Yeah. If you understand it enough to explain it, you're there.
Yeah.
So natural building has got a really good gender balance. Why do you think that is?
I think because the shoulds are gone. So I think societally we still have women should, men should, or this is a particular job. The expectation is it should be a man, it should be a woman. And those barriers are, coming down slowly. And I feel like usually change is slow at first and then all of a sudden it happens. But I think with natural building, there's no should. If there's no expectation of gender. And so therefore, if you have, particularly for women, if a woman has a desire to learn some kind of a building trade, it's almost the natural thing to go to, no pun intended, because there aren't the same barriers of walking onto a job site where it's all men and you're the only woman and you have to accept a certain amount or at least have a strategy for a certain amount of ridicule and sexual comments and whatever, right? So,
So I guess what you're sort of saying is if we got to when we get to the point of conventional construction being gender balanced, then the sort of barriers are then taken away.
Well, to me, it's, and honestly, I mean, this is opinion, right? Obviously, I can't speak facts on this, but I have a very skewed viewpoint of it too, because I'm a woman teaching, I get a lot of women who come to my workshops because they want to be taught by a woman, right? And I think most women who teach will tell you that. And so I have I don't see the normal. I see what comes into my sphere. And I think for most women, there is it's like they can expect a safe space when they know there is a woman in charge of their educational experience. Not because women do that better than men, but because every woman on the planet has had an experience where a man didn't do that for them. Yeah. And so they don't know that they will be held in a respectful manner, right? And my experience with men in natural building is that is absolutely there, right? But if you don't know, you don't know. So I have a slightly skewed experience with women in natural building that has to do with me being a woman. Yeah. But if I look at it a little larger and I see, to me, it's the barriers of who can do it are erased. And the barriers of who should do it are erased, right? Because we don't have rules for gender in natural building, right? Many cultures do, actually. So in African cultures and South American and Central American cultures, like women are the plasterers, often women are the builders, right? So the women are in charge of the clay, right? Not universally, but often. And so I had an experience actually teaching some Central American men how to clay plaster, and they're like, "This is women's work."
Right.
Like, not today.
We are gender equality.
Right, exactly. So, but, those exceptions aside, in sort of, at least in the US, I can speak to that. I think that's what draws women is they know they can do it. Right. The tools are simple. The materials, I mean, they're heavy, but there's ways to do it that you don't have to be super buff, so there's not those same physical barriers, and you're not stepping into an environment that is exclusively male, and now you have to sort of, how do you present into that environment?
Yeah.
So that's my guess, but it's, obviously hefty opinion, not fact.
Of course, yeah. There's a little question from another patron, which was a question about, are there any books or sort of fiction or non-fiction for children to get them into vernacular building or sort of circular economy type things?
What a great question, and I don't know the answer.
Because I feel like The Three Little Pigs is sort of the anti.
Unless you're my mom and you give me the alternate story of the Three Little Pigs for Christmas. I wish I knew the answer to that. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, if something comes to you,
I wish I could
then
answer that. If something comes, can I email it to you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And if anyone listening also has a suggestion, then
books for kids. Okay, I'll write it down. I'll give that a little think.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey there, I'm Mick from the Mick and Pat Show.
That's right, and I'm Pat.
Looking for a podcast that's like catching up with old friends? Well, you're in luck.
We're here to bring you weekly doses of lifestyle commentary, discuss culture and politics, and top it off with the occasional beer and film reviews.
But it's not just about us, we're a community. Our listeners are our kin, and we let you all have a say in what we discuss.
So saddle up and join the conversation at the Mick and Pat Show. You can check out our website or find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay. So let's talk myths. I know it's one of your passions is dispelling the myths. What do you come up against in terms of myths or preconceived ideas?
I mean, there's the real myths and there's the myths that people say to be funny, right? So,
right.
There's always the wolf's going to blow it down. Aren't you afraid? Which to me is clearly funny because wolves don't go around trying to blow down homes, right? That's not a big problem anywhere.
Yeah.
But also like, who could blow that hard, So like, it's just, yeah. So to me, that's always somebody trying to engage and being awkward about it, right? So I never take that one as serious. But the true myths, I mean, there's sort of the myths that come up and the myths I'm passionate about. So because to me, there's the myths about, because natural building is so easy to learn, and therefore there are so many people who are empowered to build themselves, but there isn't a set of rules to help people sort out which material is appropriate. And there's a lot of partial information and sometimes misinformation online. So if you just go searching, right, and we tend to stop when we got the answer we really wanted, not when we have, that's just how humans work, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, you check all the weather forecasts until you find the one that says it's going to be sunny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And because of that, I think there are mistakes that owner builders make, and those I'm passionate to correct, because I would love if all owner builders created perfect examples of natural buildings, right? And then there's the questions that come up. So to me, they're almost two separate questions. The things that come up the most in terms of straw are, you're going to have mice. Like, that's a given. Which, okay, if you have a barn full of straw, sure, you're going to have mice because they have little cavities to run around in and a little nest that they can make inside and a food source, right? But if you pack them tight in a wall and you plaster them, it's a solid wall. There's no cavity in there. They have to make a cavity. So they have to first dig out all of the plaster and then dig out the straw. And by that time, there's a pile on your floor. So you know they're there and you set a little trap and they're gone, right? So before there's ever an issue, you would solve the problem. So that doesn't come up. The only homes I've had mice in, they're in normal stud walls, in interstitial spaces, they're not in the straw bale walls. So the other myth is fire, obviously, and that one has been like that. There's just testing data. So if you just Google fire test straw bale, you will find the answer to that. And the
fantastic videos of ridiculously scorched straw bale walls, but still in one piece and have just charred on the surface.
Right, exactly. Or there's a straw bale house that went through a forest fire, and the only thing still standing are the straw bale walls and the chimney, right? So, so that one's fairly easy to debunk with actual data, right? And the fire test, right? It exceeds a stud wall, which is our conventional here. It exceeds a stud wall in terms of fire resistance. What are the other ones? Bugs, that you're going to have bugs. So people, as soon as you're saying, I'm going to take materials from nature, the thinking is, right? So what do we do when we're confronted with something new? We take our experience with that thing and we now just apply it carte blanche, right? So if your only experience with straw is the Three Little Pigs story, that's why that comes up, right? Because that is and so you're actually trying to connect. I think when people have those myths, they're trying to connect and they're trying to understand. And it doesn't always come out clean, but
that's a very nice way of looking at it.
No, but if you hear it that way, then you can connect back, right?
Yes.
So, so if I'm, if I bring a branch in from outside, there's probably a spider on it, right? Or some beetles or who knows what, right? So then people think, okay, well, if I'm bringing those materials in my home, that's what I'm bringing in with. But no. You're finishing a home. You just have chosen a different palette of materials. It's still a finished home. And that's where I think, so photographs of beautiful natural buildings that look clean, right? That look, and I mean clean architecturally, right? They look, they have a high level of finish on them, right? That dispels that myth. Oh, it does. It looks like a house. Okay. Right? It's just you've used these other materials. There's not going to be worms in your clay wall, right? They need water. Your wall will not have water, right? So eventually they will die, right? And then mold is another one, and biodegradation is another one. So
yes, won't it rot?
Right, exactly. So then explaining, okay, in order for things to rot, they need water, right? And wood is also biodegradable, and we build with wood all the time, and we don't ask that question. Why? Because we've been building with wood for thousands of years, and we have this set of details of how do you keep that wood dry, right? And it's the same. So let's now apply that to this fuzzy brick and keep it dry. And as long as you keep it dry, it will last forever, right?
Yeah.
So those are also just educational, right? There's a opportunity to educate about how, okay, well, what does it mean to biodegrade, right? And how does that process work? And then the same with mold, right? As long as you keep it dry, there is no mold. Mold needs moisture. So if you've solved one problem, you've solved the other problem. And then explaining how, lime and clay have this sort of relationship with humidity that actually help reduce condensation overall, and therefore reduce liquid water, and therefore reduce moisture and mold and all of that. So when someone asks questions like that, it's about understanding the material so that they can be comfortable. Sometimes comfortable to say yes to it, right? But most of the time, just be comfortable that that's a paradigm that's normal, or whatever. Right? That it's not like a hippie weirdo if it's straw bale, right? And not that hippies are weird, but I'm in that person's head. So those are different kinds of questions to me, and those are all explainable by explaining physics or testing data or whatever. And then the myths about how owner builders use materials, that's where, oh my gosh. If I could change one thing, I would like to change the understanding of mass versus insulation. Please, please, can we just understand that? Like they're physically different, opposite ends of physics. And it's not someone making something up empirically. It is scientifically provable the way thermodynamics works. That insulation blocks the flow of heat transfer. And in order to be a thermal mass, it must also be a conductor of heat transfer. So it needs to be a conductor and a storer of heat transfer. So they're literally different things. They both have a place. And in everywhere in the world, there is a way to build with mass, but it gets so thick that it's not really feasible, right? So I did a calculation when I was in school at UT, University of Texas. So that was in Austin. So it's, fairly mild climate. And I did a calculation of what wall thickness you would need if you just built with mass if you built with mass, passive solar, what wall thickness would you need in order to stay comfortable without heat or cooling? And it was 21 inches of mass. And that's in a very moderate climate. Like you don't need a winter coat in Austin, Texas.
Right.
Right. So 52.5 centimeters.
Which is, the sort of classic Southwest cob buildings are probably that and a little bit wider in the UK.
So if you never need a winter coat, like there's homes in Austin that don't have heat, right? And they're just chilly. They're not freezing. Your pipes aren't freezing, right? You're just, you need a sweater a couple days, right? So
that sounds nice.
Right? Until it's summer.
Yes.
But now transfer that into a 4-season climate. Okay, I'm not going to build a 4-foot thick cob wall like that. What's my foundation now, right? Like there's a point where it's not reasonable and I can just build with insulation, do less work, get a higher performing building, use less overall materials, right? So my overall embodied energy, if I'm including my energy in that, is less, right? So this is again like my little logical brain goes to town. So if I could correct one thing, it's that insulation versus mass. Every building should have some mass, but most buildings should also have insulation. And if you're not sure, the safe bet is insulate and put mass inside.
I think there's definitely a point of confusion, and I saw a conversation fairly recently where the result is the same. They're heating a mass building and they stay warm, and it's cold outside, and so they say, well, it's insulating me. But it's just because the result is the same doesn't mean the way you get there is the same.
And I always worry when someone gives an empirical example and says, okay, therefore it will work no matter what. Because if you delve deeper into those examples, sometimes you find out that either it's not actually performing that way, or there's something quite specific about that design that allows it to perform that way. And it doesn't just mean the material is okay. It means the material in relation to that particular design solution is okay. You know what I mean? And you can't just take one and now apply it in a different way and get the same result, right? So, like I know on the Talking Natural Homes group on Facebook, there was somebody who posted a project that they didn't know anything about, but it was some supposedly mass building in Sweden or Norway or somewhere and had no heating system. And then people were like asking specific questions about it. And they said, well, I don't know. And I was like, well, if you don't know, you can't use it as an example. Right? So, because you don't actually understand why it works that way. That's the actual question. Why did it work that way? Not it worked and therefore it will always work. You know what I mean? So, and I think that's what happens with owner builders often is, oh, this worked, so I can make it work. Well, understand why. And if you're not sure, insulate and put your mass inside.
Very, very solid advice. I think it's difficult. I see a lot with Talking Natural Homes. I think it's a wonderful resource, and I'm not knocking it in the slightest. But there is a thing where people will ask a question, and then there'll be replies which are definite, and you need to do this based on maybe someone that's done it one time before, or maybe 10 times, maybe 100 times, but. I mean, the answer is always it depends, isn't it? There is no one solution, as you said, and I find it can be quite frustrating. I mean, I don't know how you do it because you're always answering questions, and I mean, for one, I don't know how you have the time in the day. You seem to be
I haven't been on
so
there in a
hard.
month, so.
Are you having dry January or something?
Yeah, exactly. Well, so, I mean, first of all, I only go on there when I have the time, and I set a specific amount of time that I will dedicate. Right. And I only answer questions that I know the answer to. So I don't just weigh in on everything. I just, if I feel like I can help someone, or if I see that there's a thread that's going in multiple directions, then I'll weigh in. But, so I think if everybody just say what you know and don't say what you don't know.
Yeah, and understand that it's complex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What are the other big myths? Oh, misunderstanding of passive solar also.
Okay.
So that I see a lot of people say, oh, well, passive solar means I only need insulation on my north wall. I don't know where that comes from, but that is not passive solar. So I would love if passive solar design was part of physics in high school. Like, can we make that happen?
Yeah.
And certainly should be required by all architects. But if everyone had an understanding of that, I think it changes how you garden. It changes how you think about your space even. And, if you accept that west-facing sunset view picture window in your home, that then creates overheating all summer long, So, a misunderstanding of passive solar is probably the other one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I think one of the questions that I get a lot about earth floors is longevity, and that's definitely dealing with a preconceived idea of what an earth floor is. And I had an inquiry just recently from someone who is building they called it, I think, a no waste net carbon zero development somewhere in the UK. And they said they were phoning me up because they wanted, or it's been specified that they had a limecrete floor and they were worried that was too soft and that they wanted an earth floor because they thought it might be harder. And I had to correct them on that. But then they were saying their reasoning was that they wanted people to be able to walk around in stilettos. And I thought that's a very strange mentality that you're setting this change in, you want to be no waste and net zero, but you're not changing the expectations on the materials. You're expecting a new material to act like the old one, even though it's completely different.
I mean, I would say just even to step it back one step, I think as soon as you introduce something unusual, there is an expectation that not only will it perform as well, that it will outperform, right? So make it better than what is normal, or we can't go there, right? There's a guy who does this talk about natural building, who has a quote where he says, if we tried to get wood, structural wood, into the building codes today, it would be almost impossible, because there's so many different species, and how you cut the wood matters, and right? So this expectation that something new has to outperform, right, which is what you experienced. So with earthen floor specifically, I have started using adobe floor as the term. And the reason is, what I noticed when I said earthen floor is what people hear is dirt floor. They don't hear earth, they hear dirt. And they think what you're asking of them is that they live in a hovel and they're out.
Yeah.
But if you say adobe, they hear architectural material, and then they say, oh, what is that? Right? And it's a different, it sends them in a different direction, at least here in the US. And maybe you don't run into that particular one. And then when I'm sort of trying to get someone to understand the equivalent with conventional construction, I say it's similar to a hard wooden floor, right? Which is something that everyone has experienced. And so if they would have the same stiletto expectation of a wooden floor, then they should be looking at something much, much harder. Right? So was that your question?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if necessarily I actually posed the question. I just sort of went on a bit of a ramble.
Oh, no. Yeah. So I think part of, when you're doing something that's not conventional, right? That is not in most people's experience. I see part of my job as talking their language so that they can hear it in a way that leads them to questions as opposed to predispositions. Because if they're asking questions, I have an opportunity to educate them. But if they have a predisposition, they stop asking questions and they write it off, right? And so finding terms to use and finding equivalencies in sort of the ubiquitous experience of life for most people can help bridge that gap.
Yeah, there's a chap here called Craig White who builds modular straw bale homes, and he's described the straw as renewable materials, building with renewable materials, because it's sort of in that renewable energy mindset. People can kind of hook into that and understand it. Yeah. So that it's a way of speaking about it differently, so that you draw questions as opposed to closing anyone off. Yeah. Crikey, there's a lot of soft skills I need to learn.
No, you're quite skilled. Well, I mean, I think life generally is, you learn more and more and more and more every single day. And if you're not, you're bored. So, yeah. At the point where you have all the answers, you can go live on the mountain by yourself.
That's it. You've done it. The feeling that you get in a natural home, it's often talked about, the feeling, What do you think is actually causing that? What's the thing we're kind of reacting to?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I think there's sort of the woo-woo answer to that, and I think there's a scientific answer to that. So first of all, natural homes tend to be, the finishes you see were touched by a hand, right? It's not a machine that made drywall and a machine that made paint. And if the paint isn't completely uniform, it's because someone patchily made it not uniform, right? They're not these sort of flat, plasticky, machined, perfect, planar. It's handmade. And even if it's an exceptionally skilled hand, right? So if you go to Japan, the walls they're flatter than drywall. I mean, they are flat, but you can still tell that they were made by hands, right? And there's something about that feels tactile and draws you in, right? It's welcoming. I'm not finding the right word for it.
It seems like it's you're connecting with another human almost.
Yes. Right. Yes. Right. It's connected. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's, and I don't think you have to know that when you walk in. You feel it when you walk in. And the example to me is kids. If you watch, like this is a great example. My sister for a while had a clothing store, and we built the changing room was this cob spiral. And she said to me once that when a parent would come into the store with a child, the child would walk in kind of like, I have to go shopping with mom. And then they would look up and they would see the wall and they would sprint to the back of the store and hug the wall and just hang out at that wall for the whole rest of the time until they had to go. And it's not like she had playthings over there for the kids, right? It was just the wall, right? So there's something about hand-built materials from nature that speak to a really deep, unconscious part of being human. I think. I mean, this is obviously opinion, right? So I'm not stating facts, right? I'm saying opinion based on observations. But to me, kids are the unfiltered, right? And so that to me is an intuitive reaction, feeling that everyone has, but adults can sometimes shut down, right? And I think that has to do partly with the materials and partly with the fact that it was made by hand. But I think there's this whole other part of clay in particular, and lime to a degree as well, about its sort of breathability and, that sort of electric charge. And, I think from if you measured the ions in the space, there'd be more positive ions in the actual air, So, there's I think something physical going on at the same time as that sort of tactile, intuitive, emotional response that you may not even be aware of, but you feel. When I walk a group of people into a straw bale home for the first time at, straw bale and clay plasters and maybe an adobe floor and cob wall, you can hear everyone sigh, right? So they walk in and they just go, right? Like there's a release, it's quiet, it's not, there's no toxins, right? It's healthy air, it's balanced daylight, it's finishes that are constantly creating healthier air in the space. So they're actually interacting with what you're breathing in the space, and they're hand built. So the house feels like you're stepping into a sculpture, even when it's, sort of modernish. And I think all of those things play into what that feels like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think there's also a piece that feels like I could do that.
Yeah.
So I don't know that everyone feels that, but I think for people who do, when they walk into that and say, oh my gosh, I could do that, that's empowering, right? And so all of those are very positive reactions, So yeah. I don't know. it's a little woo-woo, but I see it over and over and over and over and over.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's, the feeling is a thing. It's commonly talked about, but none of us can really, put a direct thing on it. I sort of go from woo-woo to just purely practical. Like, is just having clay on the walls softer and therefore the sound is different? Is it the insulation that is making less outside sounds, like you can't hear the traffic or something? On some days I'm very much down that practical route, and on other times I'm there is something that's connecting you to people of ancient times and kind of the other side of it.
Yeah, and I think it's all of it. I think you wouldn't necessarily want to separate the pieces out, right? So clay is also the oldest building material, right? We leave caves, we dig a hole, we add water, we build a home, right? So I think from that sort of inherited reality or whatever, that's a little woo too, but if someone hands any person a ball of clay, what do?
Squidge it and they play and
immediately, right? You immediately start to do something with it, and some people make a cube and wall and a little whatever, a bowl or whatever, right? So where did that come from? How do you know to just play with it, right? And so now you're in a space where the walls have at least that as a finish. And this is our oldest building material, right? So I think there's even that connection somewhere in there, that takes us back to, this very primal human being.
Yeah.
I don't know. And to me, like, I almost don't want to separate the pieces, because I think there are scientific explanations to pieces of it. And I think there are just inexplicable reactions as human beings to clay, particularly. So, yeah, I don't know.
No, I think that's wonderful. I just wondered, is there anything you'd like to finish on? Any sort of wrapping up or words of wisdom you'd like to impart?
Oh my goodness.
That's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
That is a lot of pressure. Yeah. Be a scientist. Explore. If you're not sure about something, figure out what test would I need to do to figure it out, right? So, okay, I have clay. I don't know how to make a plaster out of it. Okay, make a bunch of different plasters. See which one works. Just be a scientist. That would be my... Yes,
I guess that's not being afraid of failure, because you're learning so fast for anything that doesn't work as a plaster. It's that's another one eliminated.
Start with something that it's okay to fail on, right? So this is like one of my mantras is don't start, like if you're going to learn Cadillac, don't start with your bathroom.
Yes, that's a really good bit of advice.
If you want to build with cob, make a mailbox first, make a chicken coop, make a shed, make a outhouse, make an oven, right? Do something small that if it failed, you wouldn't be devastated, right? If you want to learn clay plaster, go make a panel and clay plaster on a panel and keep scraping it off or make it thicker and thicker every time you want to practice. Or go to a barn or a basement or, whatever, right? So a closet, start in a closet where it's okay if it's hideous, right? Don't start with your, the space you need to be the most beautiful, because everything is a learning curve. Give yourself the space to have that learning curve, right? Is that good enough?
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Sigi. I can't believe just what a joy those 2 hours were. I really, really appreciate Sigi spending the time and having just such a wonderful conversation. The Three Little Pigs part of that conversation has really changed something in me, actually. I always found people's Three Little Pigs, Big Bad Wolf comments when we talked about straw insulation to be quite hostile. And actually hearing Sigi's take on it, that it's them wanting to connect but not knowing how, has really changed how I think about those comments now. And really, I'm looking forward to the next one so I can invite them in for a bigger and better conversation. Because of this conversation, I've actually searched out someone to talk to for the podcast, all about these kind of communication issues around sustainability. So look out for that one in the coming weeks. I did get a little update from Sigi on the books for children. This is what her email said. I know there are books that encourage kids to play outside, even building forts, but none that I know of that are specific to natural building. But there are books like Build Your Own Earth Oven by Koko or You Can Make the Best Hot Tub Ever by Becky B. These are how-to books for particular cob projects that are certainly kid-friendly, so could be good family activity books. Neither is written specifically for kids, but are both easily digestible. So that's a great suggestion of 2 books. I would also say that Kiko Denza is a friend of the podcast. He was on way back around the episode 9, maybe 8. So long time ago. Definitely check that out and check out his book, because building an earth oven is just a joy to do, especially with kids. And at the end of it, you get pizza. What's not to like? Okay, that is it from me. As always, there are links to the things that we have discussed in the show notes. If this is your first time here, do subscribe, do check out the other episodes, because if you like this, you're going to definitely like some of the other stuff that we've got for you. And if this is not your first time and you really feel like you're getting something from building sustainability, if you are able to support, then head on over to patreon.com/building sustainability. Your support would be hugely welcomed. And you get some of those sweet, sweet benefits, like being able to submit questions for future guests and some bonus episodes and general bits and bobs. Okay, until next time, bye-bye.